Ethan Carter stood in the grand chamber of the Zyrexian Imperial Palace, his hands clenched into fists as he tried to control his frustration. Towering pillars of dark stone surrounded him, glowing with strange blue symbols that pulsed like a heartbeat. At the end of the long hall, seated on a throne of metal and crystal, was Emperor Valzor, the ruler of the Zyrexian Empire. His piercing golden eyes studied Ethan with cold authority. Beside the emperor stood Princess Zyra, her posture stiff, her violet skin glowing under the chamber's lights. She was tall, nearly a head above Ethan, and her silver hair was tied back in a ceremonial braid. Her forefingers were curled into tight fists, her expression locked in a scowl of pure disdain. Ethan had come here expecting tense diplomacy. Instead, he was facing the most insane demand he had ever heard. "You want me to do what?" Ethan asked, his voice sharp. The emperor's deep voice rumbled through the chamber. "You will marry my daughter, Princess Zyra. This is the price for peace between our species." Ethan almost laughed. Almost. But the emperor's face was carved from stone. He wasn't joking. "This is ridiculous," Ethan said. "I came here as a diplomat, not a husband." Zyra finished coldly. Her sharp, slitted eyes locked onto him with pure hatred. "I agree. This is beneath me." Ethan looked at her. "Glad to know we're on the same page." Zyra crossed her arms. "You are weak. Your people are weak. This is a disgrace to my bloodline." Ethan exhaled slowly, trying to stay calm. He had trained for war, for survival, for negotiations with hostile alien races, but forced marriage. That was not in the manual. "Why me?" he demanded, looking at the emperor. "You could have chosen anyone." The emperor leaned forward. "Because Earth is valuable, and the only way to secure an alliance is through blood ties. A treaty signed on paper is meaningless. A bond of marriage is eternal." Ethan's mind raced. He knew what this meant. If he refused, the Zyrexians might see it as an insult, a reason to declare war, and Earth couldn't afford war with an empire this powerful. His earpiece buzzed. "Ethan, this is command. We need you to comply." He gritted his teeth. Of course. The people in charge had already made their decision. He was just a pawn. Ethan turned back to Zyra. She looked at him as if he were an insect she wanted to crush. "Looks like we're stuck with each other," he muttered. Zyra's eyes narrowed. "I will never accept you." The emperor stood. "The ceremony begins now." The bonding ritual. Ethan and Zyra stood at the center of a grand circular chamber. Alien priests surrounded them, chanting in a language he barely understood. The room glowed with energy as a strange golden light formed between them. "This is the bonding rite," a priest explained. "Once completed, your essences will be linked." Zyra's hands twitched, like she wanted to punch someone. Ethan didn't blame her. The priest placed a glowing crystal in Ethan's hand, and another in Zyra's. "Repeat the vow," the priest commanded. Ethan hesitated. He had sworn oaths before, but this felt too real. "I, Ethan Carter, accept this bond." Zyra spoke through gritted teeth. "I, Zyra of the Zyrexian Empire, accept this bond." The crystals flashed. A sudden surge of energy shot through Ethan's body. His vision blurred, and his heart pounded. He gasped, feeling something foreign take hold inside him. Zyra stumbled too, gripping her head. For the first time, her eyes widened in shock. The priests stepped back. "It is done." Ethan's breathing slowed. Something felt different. He could understand the Zyrexian language perfectly now, even though he hadn't learned it. His body felt lighter, stronger. Zyra looked at him in disbelief. What just happened?" The emperor smiled for the first time. "Now let us see what kind of man you really are, Ethan Carter." Ethan had no idea what was coming next, but one thing was clear: his life had just changed forever. Ethan Carter sat in a grand chamber decorated with alien symbols and glowing blue crystals. His head still buzzed from the bonding ritual, and his body felt strangely light. He clenched his fists, trying to shake off the lingering sensation of energy coursing through him. Across the room, Princess Xyra stood stiffly, her arms crossed. Her silver hair gleamed under the soft light, and her sharp violet eyes glared at him like he was an insect she wanted to crush. "This is a mistake," she muttered. Ethan sighed. "You think I wanted this? You are beneath me." Xyra snapped. "You are a human, a weak species with fragile bodies. How can you possibly stand as my equal?" Ethan smirked. "Trust me, princess, I don't want to stand anywhere near you." Xyra growled low in her throat, her fists tightening. Zyrexians were warriors, proud and fierce. She had likely trained for battle her entire life. Marrying the human must have felt like an insult to her. The heavy doors of the chamber slid open with a hiss, and a towering figure stepped inside. "Emperor Velzor, you are now bound," the emperor said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "This bond is eternal. There is no escape." Ethan tensed. The way the emperor said it sent a chill down his spine. Xyra straightened. "Father, I request permission to return to my post. I have no need to entertain this. Human." The emperor shook his head. "Your duty has changed, Xyra. From now on, you will remain by his side." Xyra's face twisted in frustration. "He is not my equal." The emperor's golden eyes flashed. "Then prove it." Ethan frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" The emperor turned to him. "You are a soldier, are you not?" Ethan nodded cautiously. He had trained in combat, but compared to the elite Cyrexian warriors, he was practically a beginner. The emperor smiled. "Good. Then you will fight." Ethan blinked. "Excuse me?" Xyra's lips curled into a smirk. "Ah. Now you understand. My father will not let me bond with someone weak. You must prove your worth." Ethan exhaled. Of course, it wasn't enough that he had to marry an alien princess. Now he had to fight for the privilege. The trial begins. An hour later, Ethan found himself standing inside a massive arena. The walls were lined with Zyrexians watching from above, their glowing eyes focused on him with curiosity. The air was thick with the scent of metal and energy weapons. Xyra stood across from him, dressed in light armor that gleamed under the artificial lights. She flexed her hands, her sharp nails looking almost like claws. "This will be over quickly," she said, rolling her shoulders. Ethan sighed. "You really hate me, huh?" "I do not hate you," Xyra said, stepping forward. "I just do not respect you." Ethan smirked. "Guess I'll have to change that." A deep gong sounded, signaling the start of the fight. Xyra moved fast, too fast. In the blink of an eye, she was right in front of him, her fist aiming for his ribs. Ethan barely dodged, twisting his body just in time. But Xyra was relentless. She swung again, forcing him to block. Pain shot up his arms from the impact. She was strong, too strong. Ethan staggered back, trying to find an opening. He couldn't match her in raw power, but maybe he didn't have to. Xyra lunged again, this time aiming a kick at his legs. Ethan jumped back, letting her overextend. In that brief moment, he saw it, a tiny gap in her stance. He moved. With a burst of speed, he ducked under her attack and grabbed her wrist, using her own momentum against her. Xyra let out a surprised gasp as Ethan twisted, flipping her onto the ground. The crowd gasped. Xyra, now on her back, glared up at him, her breathing heavy. "Not bad. For a human." Ethan smirked, extending a hand to help her up. "Still think I'm weak." Xyra hesitated for a moment, then slapped his hand away. She pushed herself up, brushing off the dust. "You are not weak, but you are still far from my equal." The Emperor chuckled from above. "Impressive. Perhaps this bond will not be a failure after all. Ethan sighed. What had he gotten himself into? Ethan stood in the middle of the grand arena, his breath heavy, his muscles aching from the fight. The Zyrexian crowd still murmured in low voices, their glowing eyes focused on him with curiosity and maybe a hint of respect. He had done something no one expected. He had held his own against Princess Zyra, the greatest warrior of her generation. Zyra dusted herself off and stepped closer, her violet eyes sharp as ever. You surprised me, human. You are not as weak as I thought. Ethan smirked. Glad to hear it. Maybe now you'll stop calling me weak. Zyra folded her arms. Do not misunderstand. You are still far below my skill. Before Ethan could reply, Emperor Valzor stood from his elevated throne above the arena. His golden eyes shined with interest. You have proven yourself to be more than an ordinary human, Ethan Carter. Perhaps you are worthy of this bond after all. Ethan clenched his fists. He didn't care about being worthy. He just wanted his freedom. Now that the trial is complete, you both will begin your new duties together, the Emperor continued. You are no longer just a soldier, Ethan. You are bonded to the royal family. That means you will represent us. Ethan frowned. And what does that mean, exactly? Zyra answered for him. It means we must work together, fight together, and be seen as one. A royal bond is not just a tradition. It is a partnership. Ethan sighed. Great, a forced marriage and a job. Zyra ignored his sarcasm. Come, we have much to discuss. With that, she turned and walked away, expecting Ethan to follow. He hesitated, then sighed and jogged after her. The royal quarters. Ethan entered a grand chamber inside the palace, decorated with sleek metallic walls and glowing blue energy streams running along the edges. The Zyrexian architecture was futuristic, but had a strange, organic feel to it. Zyra walked over to a large holographic display in the center of the room and activated it with a wave of her hand. A three-dimensional map of the Zyrexian Empire appeared, filled with star systems and glowing markers. Ethan folded his arms. So what's the plan, Princess? Zyra shot him a look. You may call me Zyra. There is no need for formalities. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That's the first nice thing you've said to me since we met. Zyra ignored the comment and pointed at the hologram. There are political tensions rising at the border of our empire. Our alliance is fragile. Many of my people do not believe that humans are strong enough to stand beside us. Ethan scoffed. Yeah, I noticed. Zyra turned to face him. That is why we must show them otherwise. We will be assigned to a mission soon. It will be dangerous, but it will also be the first step in proving that our bond is not a mistake. Ethan leaned against the wall. Let me guess. If I mess up, your people will lose all trust in humans. Zyra nodded. Correct. You are starting to understand the weight of this responsibility. Ethan sighed, rubbing his forehead. He had been a soldier before, but this was different. This was politics, something he had no patience for. Still, he had no choice. If he wanted any hope of surviving this forced marriage, he needed to make sure he didn't become a liability. Fine, he said. I'll do my part. Just don't expect me to bow to anyone. Zyra smirked slightly. Good. I would not respect you if you did. A dangerous mission. Later that night, Ethan sat by a large window in his quarters, staring out at the alien city below. The Zyrexian capital was a mixture of towering spires and glowing energy highways, filled with flying vehicles and strange neon symbols. It was beautiful in its own way, but also completely foreign. The door opened behind him, and Sarah stepped inside. She was dressed in a simple black tunic now, her usual armor gone. Without the battle gear, she looked less intimidating. We leave at dawn, she said. Our mission is simple. We are to travel to a border planet and meet with a potential ally. They are uncertain about the human-Zyrexian alliance, and we must convince them that this bond is not a weakness. Ethan nodded. And if they don't listen? Zyra's expression darkened. Then we make them. Ethan smirked. Sounds like a great honeymoon. Zyra rolled her eyes and turned to leave. Get some rest, human. Tomorrow, you will see just how dangerous the galaxy really is. As the door closed behind her, Ethan sighed. What had he gotten himself into? The next morning, Ethan stood at the docking bay of the Zyrexian palace, staring at the sleek, black and silver spaceship before him. Its curved design and glowing blue thrusters made it look faster than anything he had ever seen. Zyrexian technology was truly something else. Zyra, standing beside him, adjusted the straps of her armor. This will be a diplomatic mission, but do not let your guard down. The Rethari are unpredictable. Ethan glanced at her. Rethari, that the name of our potential allies. Zyra nodded. They are a warrior race, much like us. However, they do not trust outsiders. If we show weakness, they will reject us, or worse. Ethan sighed. Great. More aliens that don't trust humans. Zyra smirked slightly. It is your job to change their minds. Before Ethan could respond, the ship's door hissed open, revealing a Zyrexian pilot waiting inside. He had deep blue skin and ridges along his forehead. His uniform pristine. Princess Zyra, the ship is ready. Zyra nodded and stepped inside. Ethan followed, taking one last look at the massive city behind him before entering the ship. No turning back now. The journey begins. As the ship took off, Ethan sat across from Zyra in the dimly lit command room. A holographic map of their destination hovered between them, showing a red planet with a swirling storm around its atmosphere. Ethan leaned forward. So what exactly do the Rethari want? Zyra studied the map. They want strength. They believe only the strong deserve to rule. If we convince them that our alliance makes us stronger, they may join us. Ethan frowned. And if they don't? Zyra met his eyes. Then they will challenge us. Ethan sighed. Of course they will. A sudden beep echoed through the ship, and the pilot's voice came through the speakers. We are approaching Rethari airspace. Prepare for descent. Ethan tightened his seatbelt. He had a bad feeling about this. Hostile welcome. As their ship entered the Rethari atmosphere, turbulence shook the cabin. Ethan gripped the armrests, trying not to look concerned. Across from him, Zyra remained completely calm. Ethan gritted his teeth. You guys really need smoother landings. The ship finally steadied, and through the window, Ethan saw a massive fortress city built into the side of a rocky canyon. Jagged spires and metallic towers stretched toward the sky, with ships patrolling the air. When they landed, the door hissed open, revealing a group of Rethari warriors waiting for them. They were tall and muscular, with dark gray skin and glowing red eyes. Their armor was thick, covered in scratches that looked like battle scars. The leader, a Rethari with a large scar across his cheek, stepped forward and crossed his arms. You bring a human to my world, Zyra. His deep voice echoed through the air. Zyra nodded. This is Ethan Carter. He is my bonded partner and represents humanity. The Rethari leader snorted. A human warrior. I find that hard to believe. Ethan took a deep breath. Here we go again. The challenge. The Rethari warriors led Ethan and Zyra into the fortress. The inside was a grand hall, filled with burning torches and massive stone pillars. At the far end sat the Rethari chieftain, an older warrior with golden armor and piercing eyes. The chieftain studied Ethan before speaking. You expect us to believe that humans are worthy allies, that they are strong. Zyra stepped forward. He is stronger than you think. The chieftain leaned back. Prove it. Ethan sighed. Knew that was coming. The chieftain pointed to the center of the hall, where a large combat ring was marked on the stone floor. If this human can hold his ground against one of our warriors, we will listen. If not, you have wasted our time. Ethan glanced at Zyra. You're sure this is a diplomatic mission? Zyra smirked. For the Rethari, This is diplomacy. Ethan shook his head and stepped into the ring. His opponent, a massive Rathari warrior with spiked armor, grinned as he entered. The chieftain raised his hand. Begin. The fight. The Rathari warrior charged, swinging a heavy fist. Ethan barely dodged in time, rolling to the side. The force of the punch cracked the stone floor where he had just been standing. Okay, Ethan muttered. He's strong. The Rathari came at him again, this time with a spinning kick. Ethan ducked, but the wind pressure alone nearly knocked him off balance. He needed a plan. Fast. Instead of trying to match the Rathari's brute force, Ethan focused on speed. He dodged, weaved, and waited for an opening. Then he saw it. As the Rathari warrior swung wide, Ethan sidestepped and landed a solid punch to his exposed ribs. The warrior grunted, but barely reacted. Ethan didn't stop. He used his smaller size to move faster, landing quick jabs and kicks, targeting weak spots. The Rathari grew frustrated, swinging wildly. Finally, Ethan saw his chance. As the warrior raised his arm for a powerful strike, Ethan swept his legs out from under him, sending the giant crashing to the ground. A heavy silence filled the hall. Ethan stepped back, breathing hard. The Rathari warrior groaned, then slowly stood up. Instead of looking angry, he gave Ethan a nod of respect. The chieftain stroked his chin. Interesting. The human is not as weak as I expected. Zyra smirked. I told you. The chieftain leaned forward. Very well. We will listen. Ethan sighed in relief. That was too close. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The grand hall of the Rathari fortress was silent. Every warrior in the room stared at Ethan, their red eyes filled with surprise and curiosity. He had done the impossible, stood his ground against a Rathari warrior, and won their respect. Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead and glanced at Zyra. She gave him a small nod, a rare sign of approval. The Rathari chieftain, still seated on his massive throne, studied Ethan carefully. His golden armor reflected the torchlight, making his sharp features even more intimidating. You fight well for a human, the chieftain finally said, his deep voice echoing through the hall. But strength alone does not earn our loyalty. Strength must serve a greater purpose. Ethan straightened. And what purpose is that? The chieftain gestured toward the towering windows of the fortress. Through them, Ethan could see the harsh, rocky landscape of the Rathari homeworld. Vast canyons, towering cliffs, and swirling dust storms. Our world is dying. The chieftain admitted. Our resources are running low, and our enemies grow stronger. The Zyrexians ask for an alliance, but we do not trust easily. If we join you, we must know that you can offer something more than words and combat skills. Zyra stepped forward. The Zyrexian Empire has advanced technology, starships, and resources. Together, we can rebuild your cities and strengthen your people. The chieftain frowned. Many have made such promises before, only to betray us in the end. Ethan took a deep breath. Then what do you want? If a fight isn't enough, what will prove our intentions? The chieftain leaned forward. There is one way. A trial, an ancient test of loyalty. If you succeed, we will consider your offer. If you fail, we will have no choice but to reject the Zyrexians. And you. Ethan groaned internally. Of course, there's another test. The trial of fire. The chieftain rose from his throne and signaled to his guards. A large metal door on the side of the hall slid open, revealing a dark corridor leading underground. The air from within was hot and thick with smoke. The trial of fire, the chieftain announced. Only those with true strength of will can survive it. Ethan shared a glance with Zyra. She showed no concern, as if she had expected this all along. He sighed. All right, let's get this over with. Descent into the flames. Ethan stepped into the dark corridor, feeling the temperature rise with every step. Torches lined the stone walls, casting flickering shadows. Beside him, Syra walked with silent confidence. "You've done this before, haven't you?" Ethan asked. Syra smirked. "I have faced my own trials, but each one is different. This one is yours." "Fantastic," Ethan muttered. As they reached the end of the tunnel, a large chamber opened before them. The ground was cracked volcanic rock, glowing with heat. Molten lava bubbled in deep fissures, and the air shimmered from the intense heat. In the center of the chamber stood a massive stone pillar, reaching up toward a narrow opening in the ceiling. At the very top of the pillar sat an ancient artifact, glowing with blue energy. Syra pointed. "That is your goal. Retrieve it, and you pass the trial." Ethan stared at the pillar. There were no ladders, no ropes, nothing to help him climb. And below the pillar, the lava bubbled menacingly. "Great," he muttered. "A climbing challenge over a pool of lava. This just keeps getting better." Syra crossed her arms. "You wanted to prove yourself, didn't you?" Ethan sighed. Yeah. He took a deep breath and approached the pillar. The heat made it hard to focus, but he pushed forward. He placed his hands on the rough stone and began to climb. The climb. The pillar was scorching hot. Ethan gritted his teeth as he pulled himself up, gripping onto jagged rocks. His muscles burned, but he forced himself to keep moving. Sweat dripped from his forehead. Below him, the lava hissed and bubbled, sending up waves of heat. One wrong move, and he'd be cooked alive. Halfway up, the stone became smoother, making it harder to find handholds. Ethan paused, searching for a path forward. His arms were already shaking from the effort. "Come on," he muttered. "Think, Carter. Use your head." Then he saw it, a small ledge to his right. It was risky, but it was the only way. He took a deep breath and swung himself sideways, barely grabbing onto the ledge. His fingers slipped for a moment, but he held on. His heart pounded. He couldn't afford another mistake. With renewed focus, he climbed the last few feet, grabbing onto the top of the pillar. The artifact was within reach. He reached out, his fingers wrapping around the cool, metal surface. As soon as he touched it, the entire pillar shook violently. "Oh, come on," Ethan shouted. The descent. The shaking caused large chunks of rock to break off, falling into the lava below. Ethan held onto the artifact, looking for a way down. "Jump." Syra's voice echoed from below. He looked down. She was standing near a platform jutting out of the wall. It was far, but he had no choice. Taking a deep breath, he leaped off the pillar, holding the artifact tightly. For a moment, he felt weightless. Then he slammed onto the platform, rolling to absorb the impact. His arms burned from the effort, but he was alive. Syra approached. "Not bad." Ethan groaned, pushing himself up. "Not bad. I nearly died." Syra smirked. "But you didn't." She turned toward the exit. "Come, the Rari are waiting." Victory. When Ethan emerged from the chamber, the Rari warriors were waiting. The chieftain stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Ethan held up the artifact. "I believe this is yours." For a moment, there was silence. Then, to Ethan's surprise, the chieftain smiled. "You have passed the trial," he declared. "You are stronger than you look, human." The warriors around him pounded their chests in approval. The chieftain nodded. "The Rari will listen. Let us talk of this alliance." Ethan sighed in relief. He had done it, but something told him the hardest part was yet to come. The Rari warriors stood in silence, their glowing red eyes fixed on Ethan. He had passed the trial of fire, proving himself worthy in their eyes. But earning their trust was only the first step. Now came the real challenge, convincing them to join the alliance. The chieftain sat on his massive throne, studying Ethan carefully. His golden armor reflected the torchlight, making his sharp features even more intimidating. "You have proven your strength, human," the chieftain said. "But strength alone does not make an ally. Words do not make an ally, either. What guarantee do we have that the Zyrexian Empire will not betray us? Ethan wiped the sweat from his forehead. Because if we don't work together, we all lose. The Zyrexians need you, but you also need them. Your enemies are growing stronger every day. The chieftain narrowed his eyes. And what do you know of our enemies? Thyra stepped forward. More than you think. We intercepted a transmission this morning. Your greatest enemies, the Crithians, have mobilized their fleet. They are coming for you. Murmurs spread through the warriors. The Crithians, ruthless conquerors, had been at war with the Rathari for decades. The chieftain's jaw tightened. And you waited until now to tell us. Ethan stepped forward. Because we needed to earn your trust first. If we had come with nothing but warnings, would you have listened? The chieftain was silent for a moment, then nodded. You are right. He stood up. If the Crithians come, we must prepare. A Rathari warrior rushed into the hall, breathing heavily. Chieftain, a Crithian scout ship has been spotted at the edge of our territory. The room tensed. The enemy was already here. Ethan clenched his fists. Then we don't have time to waste. The battle begins. The Rathari war camp was alive with activity. Warriors sharpened their weapons, engineers prepared the defense systems, and scouts reported the enemy's movements. Ethan and Sarah stood on a raised platform, looking at a holographic map of the battlefield. The Crithians had set up their forces just outside the canyon, blocking the main exit. Zara frowned. They are waiting for reinforcements. When they arrive, the Rathari will be surrounded. The chieftain growled. Then we strike first. Ethan nodded. Agreed, but not head-on. We need a plan. He pointed at the canyon walls. What if we use these? The Crithians don't know the land like you do. If we lure them inside, we can trap them. The chieftain stroked his chin. A risky move, but it could work. He turned to his warriors. Prepare for battle. The trap is set. Night fell over the canyon. The Crithians had moved deeper into the narrow passage, their heavy war machines rumbling over the rocky ground. They believed they were advancing toward an easy victory. Hidden among the cliffs, Ethan and a group of Rathari warriors watched silently. Each warrior held a massive spear, their eyes locked on the enemy below. Ethan took a deep breath. Wait for it. Not yet. The Crithians marched deeper into the canyon. Then, Ethan gave the signal. The Rathari warriors hurled their spears, striking the Crithians from above. Massive boulders rolled down the cliffs, crushing enemy vehicles. The Crithians panicked. The narrow canyon became their prison. From the other side, the Rathari chieftain led a charge, his warriors attacking from the front. Trapped between the cliffs and the advancing Rathari, the Crithians had nowhere to run. Ethan joined the fight, using his blaster to take down enemy soldiers. It was chaos. Energy blasts lit up the night, and the ground shook with the force of the battle. Zara fought beside him, her blade slicing through enemy ranks. We have to push them back before reinforcements arrive. Ethan nodded. Then let's end this now. Victory. For now. The battle was fierce, but the Crithians were outmaneuvered. Without a clear escape, they began to fall back. The chieftain roared, "Push them out of our lands." The Rathari warriors launched their final attack, forcing the Crithians into a full retreat. Within minutes, the battlefield fell silent. The Crithians were gone. Ethan exhaled, his heart still racing. We did it. Zyra wiped sweat from her forehead. For now. But this was only the beginning. Their main fleet will come soon. The chieftain approached, placing a firm hand on Ethan's shoulder. You fought well, human. Without your plan, this battle would have been lost. Ethan met his gaze. Then do we have an alliance? The chieftain nodded. Yes, the Rathari will stand with you. Ethan felt a weight lift off his shoulders. But deep inside, he knew the real war was still ahead. The night sky was filled with stars, but Ethan had no time to admire them. He stood on the high cliffs of the Rathari stronghold, looking at the horizon where the Crithian fleet was approaching. Their ships were massive, dark silhouettes against the moonlit sky. Vzyra stood beside him, her face tense. They are coming faster than we thought. The Rathari chieftain, clad in his golden armor, approached them. We will not run. If this is our last stand, we will fight with honor. Ethan clenched his fists. We won't let that happen. We have a plan. Preparing for the final battle. In the war chamber, Ethan, Vzyra, and the Rathari leaders gathered around a holographic map of the battlefield. The Crithians had a larger force, but they had one weakness: their overconfidence. Ethan pointed at the canyon surrounding the stronghold. This is our best advantage. They don't know the terrain like we do. We can lure them into a trap. The chieftain nodded. And what of their warships? Vzyra smirked. Leave that to me. The Zyrexian fleet is on its way. If we hold the ground battle long enough, they will arrive in time. The plan was set. Now, they had to execute it. The battle begins. The Crithians attacked at dawn. Their warships fired powerful energy blasts, shaking the ground. Massive war machines rolled toward the stronghold, while waves of enemy soldiers charged forward. The Rathari warriors were ready. From the cliffs, they launched their attack. Arrows, spears, and blaster fire rained down on the Crithians, taking them by surprise. Boulders rolled down, crushing their machines. Ethan led a group of Rathari fighters in a counterattack. Blades clashed, energy blasts flashed, and war cries filled the air. Ethan fought with all his strength, dodging Crithian strikes and taking down enemies with precise shots. Vzyra was in the sky, piloting a Zyrexian fighter ship. She weaved through enemy fire, blasting enemy ships out of the air. Come on, hold the line just a little longer. The turning point. Just when it seemed like the battle was at its worst, a bright light appeared in the sky. The Zyrexian fleet had arrived. Massive Zyrexian battleships descended from the clouds, firing powerful energy cannons at the Crithian warships. The sky exploded with fire as the enemy fleet was torn apart. On the ground, the Rathari warriors rallied with renewed strength. They pushed back the Crithians, who were now disorganized and losing ground. The Crithian commander, seeing defeat, gave the order. Fall back. The enemy forces retreated, their ships fleeing into the sky. The battle was over. A new future. Ethan stood in the aftermath of the battlefield, breathing heavily. The ground was littered with destroyed machines and weapons, but they had won. Vzyra landed beside him, smiling. We did it. The Rathari chieftain approached, looking at Ethan with respect. Human, you have proven yourself. You are not just a warrior. You are a leader. Ethan smiled. I didn't do it alone. We fought together. The chieftain extended his hand. The Rathari stand with the Zyrexians. From this day forward, we are allies. Ethan shook his hand, knowing that this victory was more than just a battle. It was the beginning of a new future. As the sun rose over the battlefield, Ethan looked at Vzyra and smiled. Everything had changed, but for the better.